On the podcast today, we are going to dissect chapter 41 of the Tao Te Ching, which makes up the 41st episode of the 81 meditations on the Tao Te Ching. And as usual, Guyang will read Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation, and I will read Derek Lin's translation.
The wise student hears of the Tao and practices it diligently. The average student hears of the Tao and thinks about it now and then. The foolish student hears of the Tao and laughs out loud. If there were no laughter, the Tao would not be what it is. Hence it is said, the bright path seems dim. Going forward seems like retreat. The easy way seems hard. The highest virtue seems empty. Great purity seems solid. A wealth of virtue seems inadequate. The strength of virtue seems frail. Real virtue seems unreal. The perfect square has no corners. Great talents ripen late. The highest notes are hard to hear. The greatest form has no shape. The Tao is hidden and without name. The Tao alone nourishes and brings everything to fulfillment.
Higher people hear of the Tao, they diligently practice it. Average people hear of the Tao, they sometimes keep it and sometimes lose it. Lower people hear of the Tao, they laugh loudly at it. If they do not laugh, it would not be the Tao. Therefore, a proverb has the following: the clear Tao appears unclear. The advancing Tao appears to retreat. The smooth Tao appears uneven. High virtue appears like a valley. Great integrity appears like disgrace. Encompassing virtue appears insufficient. Building virtue appears inactive. True substance appears inconstant. The great square has no corners. The great vessel is late in completion. The great music is imperceptible in sound. The great image has no form. The Tao is hidden and nameless, yet it is only the Tao that excels in giving and completing everything. This chapter goes into how truth is paradoxical. More to the point, the Tao is paradoxical. Hence we have great lines like, the great square has no corners. I mean, if someone was just coming across the Tao Te Ching, they'd think, what craziness is happening? And also another aspect of this chapter is the ones who understand this paradox and those who don't.
Yes, right. So here, the three different students, the wise one, the average one, and the foolish one. And the foolish student hears of the Tao and laughs out loud. If there is no laughter, the Tao wouldn't be what it is. Again, that itself is pretty paradoxical, isn't it? Yes. So that old saying that truth is a paradox, right? Otherwise, it won't be truth. Somehow, when you have eyes to see how the both opposite can be synchronized, that's where the truth resides, right? And so here when the Lao Tzu says the foolish students, he put it that way, but like just people who are operating from just very linear way of thinking, black and white, and just very just common idea of things, right? From that perspective, of course, how can you see the truth in the paradox, right? In that way of thinking, again, like a linear way of thinking, like how could truth be paradox, right? If it is, show me the evidence, right? Yes. So again, the Lao Tzu here explaining how obscure and how like a mysterious this truth, the Tao, is.
As I've mentioned in many of these Tao Te Ching podcasts, is that trust is the paradox of unity, right? And a lot of people say, well, how is that so? But when you understand how truth is paradox, you understand it perfectly clear. The oneness of the Tao can only be experienced, and someone can only abide in that if they trust. It's not like some linear thing you work out. It doesn't equate to black and white thinking. So black and white thinking, say for world peace in air quotes, would be, well, we're going to go around and we're going to push our morality on others, get everyone to think the same, and then we will all be on the same page. Doesn't work. We all know that's never worked. And so Lao Tzu is explaining it pretty clear that even the concept of world peace in air quotes can only be attained in a certain way through trust. I mean, the concept of world peace is, not a very good concept in general, because it's usually based on a utopian world.
Yes.
And so, first of all, that sort of way of thinking needs to be eradicated, where Lao Tzu says it's only through trust that we can live in harmony with each other. And so then when you understand Wu Wei and you understand non-interference and how things actually operate in your own immediate life, you see how they operate on a collective level as well. And so you have this constant paradox in life. Nothing is definite. He doesn't say in the chapter a square has 4 corners. He says a square has no corners.
Yes.
And again, this is about getting yourself out of logical thinking too.
Right.
You know, so this is like classic Taoism and classic Zhuangzian mentality as well, where Zhuangzi has all of this paradox and wordplay where if you're new to the tradition, you'll be like, what is he talking about? But what it does is it opens up a different aspect within your mind. So it gets you out of this logical train of thought where, as you mentioned, black and white thinking, like this is that and that is this. Whereas we just throw it out there and say, we don't know what is this or that.
Right.
So we live in life and we're looking at life objectively outside of our own subjective conditioning. And you're experiencing life in a different way.
Yes.
And, you know, that relates to why he says, like, foolish people, higher level people, lower level people,
Yes.
and this and that, right? So if we look in the modern day, the so-called ignorant people of the world, not that there's anything wrong with those people, but they're ignorant or they have forgot the Tao. And so they forgot this kind of non-linear, paradoxical reality that we actually live in.
Right.
And we've decided that we live in this linear model which we can come to a logical conclusion about. Science hasn't contributed to that at all. Even though science has helped humanity a lot, these kind of bigger questions, it kind of undermines these bigger questions. Then people don't think in paradox. They think in a linear model. Whereas nature itself is non-linear. And so Lao Tzu is kind of reminding us of that non-linear nature of nature, which we are, and is kind of trying to get us to get out of our head to see reality as it truly is.
It's interesting that actually we can find the truth, the Tao, the way of universe within the cycle of nature, right? Again, I just said the cycle of nature. Nature is cyclical. But we have been educated otherwise, right? We always like to think in a linear term. Like we need to get somewhere or go from A to B, and
Yes.
like it's always in a straight line. You go down along that line, and you keep progressing.
Yeah.
Again, the big thing in science is that they're a big supporter of progression, right? That infinite progress is it really healthy for everyone?
Is it progress?
Yeah, is it really progress? Yes. Whereas when we always look for some sort of wisdom or to some deep advice, we look to nature, right? And when you look at nature, it is a cyclical system, and it often seems like going nowhere because it's not a linear term. Again, looking in from the linear perspective. But once you understand that nature is cyclical, then the truth, the way of things, way of life, our life is also cyclical as well.
Yes.
So almost it seems like our linear way of thinking is kind of I don't know, it's just something so abstract, it's not real, but we want to believe it's real.
Yeah, that linear way of thinking, instead of leaving things alone, for example, we have to interfere with everything. This is how we this is how we are going to come to an end to this. This is how we are going to solve this problem. Where like the paradoxical, natural way is to go, I'm just going to leave it alone and let it resolve itself. Because the Tao is complete and fulfilled in and of itself.
Yes.
Right? And so, like you were talking about before, when you were talking about the foolish person laughing and this and that, and it couldn't be the Tao if it wasn't. Yeah. Right? And so, to your point, like with this linear way of thinking, if we saw a person laughing about the Tao or criticizing it, we would then be there to defend it. See? Like a linear perspective. black and white thinking. Where the wise, Lao Tzu's like, of course they criticize it. That's just the perfection of the Tao. Because they're ignorant, and only ignorance can only express itself. It's not that they can come to a conclusion about what we're talking about. They don't understand paradox. They don't understand that they are a natural part of the world. So of course it is. And so when you have that sort of objectivity outside of subjectivity, then you can see it for what it is, because the Tao is holistically complete.
Yes.
But we get caught in the drama of life, right? So then we start to defend these spiritual principles, like, you just don't understand the Tao, you don't get it. And look, the truth is they don't get it, but when you have the eyes to see, you can see that from that sort of irrational, paradoxical, natural perspective, that of course they don't understand it.
Yeah.
And so all of these great texts are there for all of us to remember something that we forgot, right? Like you said, we made a lot of progress with science, right? And science is doing a lot of things that is helping humanity, but it's also doing a lot of things that is hurting humanity and other species as well, and the planet and so forth and so on. We don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but this is another paradox, right? In progress, there is a regression.
Yes.
It's not actually,
Exactly.
So it's not either or. It's like, hey, we're making progress, but then you look at the whole scope and you go, but we're taking away something from something else
That's
as well
right.
in this so-called progress. And so Lao Tzu is saying we need to come back, we need to remember the Tao. And so it's kind of something that we've fundamentally forgot. And so obviously the ignorant and the lower level, as Derek says here, the lower level of practitioners don't get it, but it could only be that way.
Yes.
And in this one, Derek's not saying like higher level of sort of people in society or lower level people of society. It's just it's strictly in the sense of people who understand the Tao.
Yes.
And understand this paradox of truth.
Yes. Yeah, those 3 levels of students and practitioners are actually also representing what kind of attitude you have towards exploring the truth as well.
Yep.
Obviously, the wise student would be someone who are very open to things. So having open mind and just to give themselves a bit of a, space to things go the other way, the different way, other way than what they thought, like having an open mind and explore the nature of the truth. But if you were like the foolish student is more so like, not like don't want to accept things. They want to keep things as they are. And yeah, like you mentioned, they almost like to look down on this way of thinking.
Yes.
Again, so that they have to laugh at this, otherwise it won't be truth.
No, that's the way. Like the Tao gives to all, right? Gives to all and completes everything. But that's their way in that point in time, right? The reason why it resonates with those who remember, right? It has a strong resonance with us who don't undermine it and who are open and flexible to whatever the reality. Again, humility becomes a big part of it, right? So the difference between the high level practitioner and the low level is this sense of softness and the ability to be soft and gentle, but also to live with principles as well.
Right.
And that's one of the hallmark differences, because the low level practitioner is rigid and is demanding and has a lot of conditional beliefs, and that's what determines how they approach the world. They don't have the soft gentleness. They come from a path of interference.
Yes.
Where Wu-Wei, being the path of non-interference, is essential in understanding the nature of reality, because when you come from that place, you're naturally humble without having to think about it, and you're naturally open. But in saying that, it doesn't mean you're like a flimsy open. You still live with principles.
Yes.
But you can just move away from a certain situation and not think anything about it, because you know that maybe whatever that situation is, those people who are involved in it are just maybe psychologically a bit unstable.
Yes.
And so it would be unstable of you to engage in it, right? And so this is the difference, right? Where like the higher level practitioner knows that Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah.
So greatness is a gradual process. It's not something you get overnight. And see, we live in this world, particularly because of social media and the access of information, everything like that, that we can become great overnight. You might be able to, let's say this, right? You might be able to achieve instant wealth.
Mm-hmm.
You might be able to achieve instant fame. That doesn't make you great. That makes you popular. And again, one of the hallmarks of a low-level practitioner is they want name recognition, they want fame.
That's right.
Whereas the higher practitioner doesn't want name recognition. They would prefer to be quiet and just to conduct their business privately.
Yeah, the low-level practitioners think that is great. Having a name recognized and, get their face known and this and that, that's, they regard it as great, right?
Yes, yeah.
But again, that's coming from the low-level understanding.
Yeah, and it's coming from the ego, the persona.
Yeah.
And so the ego and persona has a rational view of the world based on its conditioning, and obviously rationality is based on a linear model system, whereas being completely irrational is based on more of a non-linear system. And you, even from that place, you're open and you're willing to listen to the world to a degree, in the sense that you're still going to live by your own personal principles, but you're not going to be blown here or there by whatever someone says. You're just free to walk away. And as Lao Tzu walked away from Confucian society, right? He was like, this is obviously bogus. I'm out.
Yes.
And so we all have that inner tenacity if we are living from this higher level. If we're living from the lower level, we'll just want to be famous and this and that, but we won't want to step on anyone's toes. We'll want to just go by. So because a low-level practitioner wants social validation. Lao Tzu didn't need social validation. They all thought he was crazy from the get-go. And so he did what he needed to do in that moment. He's not going to bend to social insanity.
Yeah, well, social... they want to get the recognition from the society, but then, like you just said, the Lao Tzu thought that society itself is insane. So, why do you need to please the society, really?
You don't.
Yeah.
You definitely don't.
And I think also being a higher level practitioner, the wise student is also to having the higher level of awareness of things. That from that place, you know how to act, how to behave appropriately, right? From the higher level of awareness, you would know innately from your heart that you are not going to seek fame or recognition and whatnot. Why? Because actually that's not natural to us.
No.
Yeah, so from that place, you will only act naturally and appropriately at the same time.
Yeah, well, and that's why the Tao Te Ching was recommended for leaders in that, right? Back in the Warring States period of China, because the leaders were maybe they put themselves in that position, but there would have been times when they were put in that position by other people. And so it was like, well, how do I deal with this unfortunate circumstance of being known by everybody? Like, how do I actually deal with the burden of this responsibility?
Right.
And Lao Tzu is saying, obviously, that those sorts of positions aren't natural. Like, for example, someone well known in this modern day, it's not natural for so many people to know. Like, for example, Elon Musk could go anywhere in the world and everyone would know him, right? This is not natural. That's nothing against Elon. It's just the way that the world is now with social media and the access of social media and technology. Everyone knows basically everyone.
Yes.
And so that type of fame is a burden in some sense. I mean, you can deal with it in a jovial manner, right? Or it can really weigh on your soul. And so in this chapter, again, like one of the big differences is about that type of open paradoxical thinking. It's almost like an intuitive aspect, as we've spoken other podcasts before about this ability to think deeply and this and that.
Yes.
Almost like an innate ability, right? Like, whereas we've all probably experienced this. You've probably introduced this type of paradoxical thinking to people and they don't quite understand it because there's not an intuition there. And so I don't know if it's an innate thing, but there are some people that, for example, you can read the Tao Te Ching and you can intuitively feel it opens up a space within your mind and heart that you probably didn't know existed because you thought that there were four corners to a square. And look, there are four corners to a square in a certain perspective, but the idea here is to get you out of that logical, linear way of thinking.
Yes. Again, it gives us opportunity to be a bit more relaxed and flexible, right? So that in that sense, it's more kind of a relief, actually. You can think differently and you can get out of that sort of very like fragmented, linear idea of things. So you can like flex your muscles in your brain and you can exercise your way of thinking.
Yep,
Yes.
that's right. And so Lao Tzu in this chapter is mentioning that for you and I and everyone listening and watching, the people who are invested in the natural path, is that Lao Tzu is saying that the difficulty is being consistent day in, day out. That's the real difficulty. It's not a difficulty of meditative practice or anything like that. Just having that mind where you're constantly remembering the Tao and cognizant of the paradox of reality. That's the difficulty because, as we all know, linear way of thinking comes in, dualistic way of thinking then comes in, and then we can go down many, many rabbit holes then. And so we need to, in some sense, guard ourselves from that in some way,
Right.
in remembering the Tao. And so that's about it, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, guys, we hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you guys next time.